Well, here in the U.S., I think from a compliance standpoint, mycotoxins have attracted a lot of attention. So I think that firms are kind of grappling in terms of how to satisfy FDA requirements related to controlling the risk of mycotoxins. Um, Sampling and testing for mycotoxins is just really challenging. If you've been in the industry very long and tried to do that, you understand that kind of some of the inherent difficulties in being able to sample a given lot of grain or grain byproduct and getting a good read on in terms of the level of mycotoxins that may be present.
Welcome, everybody, today to your Feed Science podcast brought to you by Wisenetics. My name is Carlos Campabadal. I'm an outreach specialist in feed manufacturing at the IGP Institute of Kansas State University. And in behalf of Wisenetics, we are here dedicating you to bring you the latest insights and discussions in the feed science from the feed science and feed manufacturing industry. Today, I'm very happy and honored to be able to be the host of a friend, a person that I know for quite some time now here from the feed industry, also K-State alumni, Mr. Dave Fairfield. Welcome very much, Dave. We appreciate your time to be part of this Feed Science podcast for Wisenetics. And welcome. And first of all, I know you're a busy person, but we want to have this conversation and also learn some technical information that is very important for this type of podcast for our domestic and international audience to hear about that. So again, Dave, welcome. And first of all, if you just want to say a couple things, introduce yourself to the audience so they get to know who you are.
Yeah, thanks, Carlos. I really appreciate the opportunity to be involved. Like Carlos said, I'm a graduate from the Grain Science Department at Kansas State University a long time ago, originally from Kansas, raised on a farm. After I got out of school at K-State, I went to work in the commercial feed industry. Had the opportunity to work for about 20 years for different companies in facility management, operations type roles, different feed mills around the country. And then in 2001, I had the opportunity to go to work for the National Grain and Feed Association. And I'm currently a senior vice president there. And most of the time I spend is kind of focused on food and feed safety activities and issues. So a little bit about me.
Commercial mills and integrators often face challenges in managing moisture levels, leading to pellet quality challenges, reduced efficiency and productivity, feed wastage and nutrient segregation. Proper moisture penetration and retention within feed particles during conditioning and pressing acts as a heat conduit, allowing for uniform heat transfer throughout the meal. This uniform distribution of heat improves starch gelatinization and increases pellet quality and durability. Milling efficiency aids such as MaxiMill facilitate moisture absorption and retention within pellet feeds and help producers mitigate many of these commonly observed pellet appearance deviations. Contact a clean feed expert today to learn more about how MaxiMill supports pellet quality.
Great, Dave. So as you mentioned, 20 years in the feed operations industry, different companies. If I remember on top of my head, there's Wayne, there's Hubbard, so on, and then since 2001, correct, is when you joined NGFA.
Yeah, that's right. If you add up the years, you can kind of come up with a large number. So I've been in the industry for going on 43 years.
Wow. So people are going to be wondering if you started there when you were 10 years old, huh? There on that sense. So
I wish.
Yeah, good. Well, no, that's a very interesting career, and I'm pretty sure that your transition from feed operations to an association, maybe there was some change there specifically. Anything that maybe you remember from those times that made you face that difference from going from a day-to-day feed mill operations to working in an association? Same for the feed industry, but it's a different type of job in a way.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely different. Anybody who's been in operations at a feed mill knows that, you kind of have goals hour by hour almost. I mean, things need to happen, things need to get done, animals need to be fed, customers need to be served. And so it is, it's just an ongoing pace. And so stepping out of that type of environment into what I would call more of a policy role, where you can spend a lot of time just thinking about things, where perhaps you spend a lot of time debating about what a word means on a piece of paper. It's definitely a different environment, but I guess I think I've been blessed over the years to have experienced kind of both situations. At least in my time with the NGFA, I kind of approach all these different policy issues from kind of an operational mindset. In that, we could be discussing how some regulation should be put together, how it should be worded, but in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, really, how would a feed mill or some facility that needs to operate demonstrate compliance with this type of requirement that somebody thinks ought to be put into law? And so hopefully my time in the industry has given me some experience to kind of try to influence policy in a more practical way. Sometimes we've had successes, sometimes not so much, but that's been the goal along the way.
Great. So you bring that type of experience, that understanding how things get operated in the feed mill itself, and then bring it to that level that when you come on to make a regulation or something around those lines, that bring that perspective. And I think that's very important, and that's what very very needed in our, especially in our industry, on how it has evolved as I see it. Also, for our audience, please, if you have any questions or please leave it on the comment section on the podcast. Anything you might want to have to Mr. Dave Fairfield. So going back to the conversation, that's something that you brought, that experience from operations into that type of evolution of that type of work doing regulations and other type of things related to that for the well-being of the industry. A little bit on that. One topic that always has evolved a lot, especially during that time, is feed safety, animal feed safety. So as I know you and the work that we have done together too, training people, can you explain a little bit more about that animal feed safety expertise and kind of a little bit how that has evolved the industry itself on this past 20 years per se?
I think when I first joined the industry, feed safety really wasn't a focus. I think back then a lot of companies had feed quality assurance staff perhaps, or feed control staff perhaps, but feed safety certainly wasn't kind of a key component of day-to-day operations. We've had, for medicated feed manufacturers, we've had regulations in place since 1976. So, that was a focus 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But beyond that, I can't remember that feed safety was top of mind. I think a lot of that mindset began to change in the 1990s when the first cases of BSE were being identified. First in England, and then ultimately, we've had cases in the U.S. But I think that was really the first kind of situation where the feed industry realized, what we feed to an animal can certainly impact both animal health and human health. Certainly we realized that drug residues could do that before that, but here we were just feeding a substance, non-medicated substance to an animal, causing the animal to get sick, and then also had the potential to cause human illnesses too for people who maybe ate contaminated meat from that animal. So that was kind of a sea shift, I think, in terms of how animal feed kind of fit into the public health system. And since then, I think we've seen kind of just a stepwise progression about how feed safety influences not only animal health, but human health. Mm-hmm. Part of that's been the integration of animal agriculture over the years, kind of the sophistication that's come along with that. Some of this has been kind of driven by consumer packaged goods companies who are very interested, if they're involved in selling animal-derived food, protecting their brand, and maybe wanting their supply chains to demonstrate feed safety practices, potentially being involved in third-party certification programs. And then probably most recently, there are these One Health initiatives that are popping up in public health jurisdictions. It's this idea that, okay, what happens in the environment, what happens with people, what happens with animal, the health of all those things is kind of interrelated, and one influences the other. And so I think there's been a lot of dynamics at play over the last 20, 30 years, and certainly feed safety is more top of mind than it ever has been.
Wow. Yeah. With especially when you mentioned that all the dynamics that takes place in so many perspectives and areas in the as the whole agriculture value chain and ended up in our food. Uh, Based on your experience on all you said, how do you feel that the feed safety systems have felt or have adapted through all this new regulations, to all these new changes going on in terms of feed safety?
Well, I think 20 years ago, when I started with the NGFA, one of the first things I got involved with, I can remember in fall of 2001, I brought some industry folks to the Feed Science Department at Kansas State University. We met with faculty there and some other people, and we started talking about the use of hazard analysis and critical control point principles within the feed industry. Back then, the use of those principles was not widely used, but we just saw kind of the coming storm in that there was going to be a need to have kind of risk-based, systematic approaches to deal with food safety topics. And so, as an outcome of those initial, conversations that took place 20 years ago at K-State, there's actually HACCP training, or hazard analysis critical control point training programs that were developed for the industry and offered for many years at Kansas State University and other places as well. These were voluntary programs we were talking about. Nothing, we didn't have regulatory requirements in place at that time, but we were just trying to promote the use of kind of systematic tools to help feed manufacturers think through what hazards there were associated with their operation and what kind of controls were available to deal with them. And so I think that's been the progression, really, just the growing awareness that, feed safety needs to be kind of this systematic, thorough, comprehensive approach. It's just not a kind of a one and done type deal. There needs to be thought put in place and an ongoing program to deal with things that can cause animal food and human health situations.
Well, same as in the human food environment, things get evolved and are constantly changing. So it is very important to keep in mind that in the animal feed industry, it's exactly the same. There's no change in that, and that's why all this trainings and information is very important to be up to date on all those, especially also on the regulation side of things. So for our audience, please visit our site, wisenetics.com, and learn more about all of our podcast segments like in poultry, swine, dairy, beef, of course, this one, feed science, and pet food. So Dave, based on all this, on how the industry, how it has evolved, what do you see are the challenges that pretty much are going on that the industry faces on a day-to-day in order to have an effective feed safety plan or program?
Well, I mentioned kind of the HACCP training that got running or going on in the feed industry beginning in the kind of the late 2000s. With the implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act that got signed into law in 2011, most animal food manufacturers now have regulatory requirements that are very HACCP-like. And so they've got to put together required food safety plans that have to address hazards and implement effective controls along the way. So, today, most companies, we've kind of transitioned from this voluntary approach using HACCP principles to FDA requirements in the U.S. I think implementation of effective plans can have a number of challenges. The requirements are hard to understand. There's ongoing training that occurs, at K-State and different parts of the country through the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance to help inform the industry what those requirements are, but they're complicated. And I think some of the issues in terms of trying to implement effective programs, some of these things are pretty fundamental. First, there needs to be a strong lack of or strong commitment by management to support developing a program because, like I mentioned before, these programs are not kind of cookie cutter things. They're not easy, they're complicated. And so there's going to be significant time and effort and resources needed to allocate an effective plan to implement one. And so if there's a lack of management commitment, that can certainly be a challenge. I think another thing along the way in terms of building an effective food safety plan is there needs to be these baseline programs in place to deal with kind of sanitation and basic operating procedures because those are foundational to being able to implement an effective plan to significantly minimize or control hazards that may be associated with the operation. So having those prerequisite programs or CGMP programs, whatever you want to call them, formalized and implemented well, that's going to be necessary. And if you don't have those in place, it's going to be a challenge to have an effective plan. I think another thing to mention is, I've seen plans that the industry has put in place that are just too complicated. If your plan's too big, it's too complex, and it's going to be likely that you're going to focus resources and time and energy on things that may not really matter. And so from a hazard standpoint, I think these programs really need to focus on those significant hazards so that you can have the resources and have the time needed to control those effectively and let your prerequisite programs and some of your other CGMP requirements deal with some of the less significant hazards along the way. So those are a few ideas I have in terms of what needs to be in place to implement an effective plan.
Yeah, and I always think about it following what you're saying. I mean, when I help companies and people on this is, of course, resources, it's difficult sometimes, but it's necessary to do this. Culture, the culture change and something that we have to, and then I'm probably one of those that likes to make maybe things too complicated instead of make them simple. And I think that's a great piece of advice that you just mentioned on that, because the simplest way just to approach and see the true hazards and on that it is important. It is important, especially now that here in the United States, having the Food Safety Modernization Act, it make us think a lot more, and of course the companies to align that. So very important to that sense. So we saw those challenges on implementing a feed safety plan or program, and what do you think are or what have you seen lately are on the hot topics related to feed safety now these days?
Well, here in the U.S., I think from a compliance standpoint, mycotoxins have attracted a lot of attention. So I think that firms are kind of grappling in terms of how to satisfy FDA requirements related to controlling the risk of mycotoxins. Sampling and testing for mycotoxins is just really challenging. If you've been in the industry very long and tried to do that, you understand that kind of some of the inherent difficulties in being able to sample a given lot of grain or grain byproduct and getting a good read on in terms of the level of mycotoxins that may be present. So that's one issue. I think moving forward in the U.S., currently we've got regulatory guidance for 3 mycotoxins, fumonisin, DON, and aflatoxin. There's been talk within the agency about additional regulatory guidance for zearalenone.
Yeah,
I think if that ever, that comes forward, that'll be an issue to deal with. Beyond mycotoxins, the whole topic of the potential transmission of viruses through feed has certainly attracted a lot of attention here in the U.S. anyway. This began back in 2014, I think, with kind of the introduction of porcine epidemic diarrhea virus into the U.S. swine herd, and it's only amplified because of the risk of African swine fever or classical swine fever too. So there's a lot of work being done about the potential for feed serving as a vector for virus transmission. So far, I don't think from a regulatory compliance standpoint, FDA in the U.S. has expectations that feed manufacturers try to deal with that type of hazard within their food safety plans or feed safety plans. But in the future, that may come about.
Yeah.
Certainly, high path avian influenza is a current topic in the U.S. Again, there haven't been a lot of fingers pointing at feed as being a vector for that, but the potential is always there. And so I think there's going to be a lot of work in the future about virus as a risk in animal feed, and we're going to have to find out good ways within the industry on how to mitigate those types of risks.
Yeah, that's an important, very important, the virus. And we see it here at Kansas State University, having our BRI, Bio Research Institute, and of course, NBAF from USDA, National Bio Agri Defense Facility, and Homeland Security, being here literally next door to where I'm located. And a lot of work has been going on the virus, especially through animals. Not yet feed, as you mentioned, but is the next thing. So that's very important. And I think we all have to know. I see with my experience all the issues of that in China, Dominican Republic, some parts of Europe and Southeast Asia on African swine fever. And yeah, I mean, it's a economical loss to a lot of people. And of course, at the end of the day, less food available. And I think, Dave, that a part of our mission overall, being Fit Millers, is to make the food for the animals to feed the world. Sounds a little bit a cliche, I guess, but at the end of the day, it's a little bit of right in that. So here for our audience, please, if you learned something new today, please share the video, and don't forget to like us there on our on the thumbs up on this podcast with that. So following a little bit that conversation, because you did mention some of those hot topics, mycotoxins and virus, and overall, and I know this is a little bit kind of like similar to it, but what do you see on feed safety in the future? I mean, do we start seeing a little bit more connection with, of course, sensors, artificial intelligence, overall technology, but what do you see? I mean, or what have you heard, or what do you envision on it in the near future?
Kind of related to technology and the ability to sense and identify things. I think traceability will be an emerging or growing topic of emphasis within the feed industry. In the U.S., the Food Safety Modernization Act required additional traceability requirements for certain types of food. The FDA just finished a rule, or publishing a rule on that topic. Animal food was exempted. I don't know how long animal food will be exempted, kind of given the current environment that we live in and just the desire for being able to track and trace food safety incidents and food in general through the value chain. So certainly technology is going to play a role in our ability to do that moving forward. So I could envision additional traceability requirements in the future at some point. I think along with technology and automation, lab capabilities continue to improve. Our ability to analyze for contaminants, get small, the levels or detectable levels continue to get smaller and smaller. And so I think that only means there's going to be less tolerance for potential contaminants in animal feed moving forward into the future as well. The feed manufacturer's ability to maybe detect those contaminants on a more timely basis. Again, getting back to your comment about automation, I think that ultimately might be a solution in some of those cases to try to meet either consumer expectations or regulatory expectations related to contaminants in feeds into the future as well. One topic that I think is kind of on the horizon for animal feed is allergens. Mm-hmm. So far, we've avoided that conversation, but I don't know for how long. Yeah. Particularly for animal food that's used and stored in the home, there's the potential, if ingredients maybe have allergen concerns and people handle those products, I think that's a topic that's going to continue to kind of be brought up periodically, and ultimately we may have to deal with as an industry moving forward too into the future. And then the last thing is this One Health initiative that I mentioned earlier before, and the idea that the environment, animals, and people are all interconnected. One of the current topics there that is of interest in the U.S. to the Food and Drug Administration is PFAS, or these per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, these kind of forever chemicals that can be in the environment get taken up into plants or get to, be found in groundwater, and their potential to impact human and animal health. And so I think it's those types of topics that we're going to be dealing with more frequently into the future.
Yeah, wow, yeah, that's a lot of things to think about. I didn't even thought ever about allergens, and I'm particularly allergic to shellfish. A son of mine from peanuts, and those things do happen on a regular basis more than we think about it, but something to consider. They're very important. So this has been a great conversation, and just want to kind of circle back a little bit because I think it is important, especially for our domestic audience, to kind of outline a little bit. I mean, your role as vice president of NGFA, which is the National Grain and Feed Association, for those who don't know it. But can you just share a little bit about how NGFA contributes to this feed safety from your perspective and your role and your colleagues?
We talked a little bit about policy, and so within the U.S., the NGFA is a trade association. We have many member companies involved in feed manufacturing, grain processing, grain handling. And so when regulatory agencies within the U.S. propose new requirements, usually it goes through a rulemaking process. And so there are opportunities to provide comment on proposed requirements and make an argument about, why these are good or why these maybe need to be revised. And so clearly, kind of at the outset, NGFA tries to influence policy to make sure that requirements that are put in place are practical and meaningful. And so we are involved in kind of the outset of the regulatory frameworks that are put in place for our industry members. Once those regulations do get put in place, we kind of shift over and try to provide education and training to inform the regulated industry about what the compliance obligations are and what to do to meet them. And so, we talked a little bit about here in the U.S., we have the Food Safety Modernization Act requirements. A lot of regulations were implemented that affect the feed industry here in the U.S. And so the NGFA has been involved in trying to provide training and outreach to the industry to help the regulated industry understand what the requirements are and meet those requirements. You mentioned, Carlos, that we've had the opportunity to partner things in the past, and that's one of the things we partner on. We offer feed industry training to develop animal food safety plans to conform with FDA requirements, and so that's part of what we try to do at the NGFA. We try to identify good partners that we can work with to help meet the industry's needs.
Great. No, I think that's a fantastic, and I'm sure that around the world there's other countries might have something similar, but I do believe that NGFA, and I know it's more than 100 years old, but that actually plays probably a key role around the world, leading some of this movements of feed safety and other topics. So we really appreciate what you guys do, and so with that.
It's time for our famous three.
So with that, we'd like to thank you, of course, for participating. We're coming to the end of the time, but before we go on that, we know you're an expert in feed manufacturing operations, of course, feed safety regulations, and one of the things that we like to do in this Feed Science podcast by Wisenetics is to also help the audience give advice on books and also some of the things to be a successful professional, some tips and things like that. So based on that, what would be some of those favorite books or resources that you actually lean on? Let's say, for example, in feed manufacturing or feed safety or anything related to what we have talked today.
For feed manufacturing, I'll kind of call out a sister trade association that we get involved with from time to time. The American Feed Industry Association, historically has put out a feed manufacturing technology manual that kind of, for the U.S. industry anyway, has kind of been a Bible for feed manufacturing operations. And so, that's something that I have relied on over the years and continues to be a good resource, I think, for technology and kind of manufacturing type topics. And I know that, for other kind of more specific manufacturing areas, Watt Publishing has put together a really significant resource for pelleting operations that I would point out. It's available online. For feed safety resources, again, this would be primarily for U.S. feed manufacturers. I mentioned before the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance has put together kind of a training program to help the animal feed industry meet the requirements associated with building animal food safety plans. They have a website, fspca.net. You can download the curriculum that FSPCA has put together. It's free. It's publicly available. It's kind of a heavy read, but it's a good resource in terms of FDA requirements for food safety plans along the way as well. So those are a few resources I think that could be helpful.
And I know that at least in the Feed Tech book from FIA, you have been involved, as I know, and probably the other ones too. So great recommendations. Besides talking about feed, outside of our work, any other book or resources that you might recommend to help professionals?
I don't have a good maybe reference for a book. I guess for feed safety and some compliance issues, though, I would also mention NGFA's website. We have a number of kind of free resources available there that relate to feed safety in general, and then in more particular, some regulatory topics. And so I guess I ought to mention that those resources are publicly available as well if anyone has a need for that.
Good. And to finalize, in your opinion, when you're helping professionals, either young or midway through the career at the end, what do you think are some of those skill sets or success things that you can separate good, successful professionals from the ones who are not? I mean, what would you recommend somebody going up in their career?
It's one thing. One thing I'll start out with. It's kind of an old adage, but showing up is just a big part of being successful at anything that you want to do. And so just being there and making the commitment to be involved and engaged in whatever's going on within your organization, I think will go a long way in kind of rounding out your perspectives and giving you the mindset and the view on how you can be successful within the company that you're participating in now or maybe into the future. I think another thing to always keep in mind is that if you're involved in managing people, you really need to try to communicate what your expectations are for those people, and then provide them with an environment to succeed. Often I see failures within different people, not so much in their ability, but in kind of the environment they've been put in. And so I think a key for you to be a successful manager is to be able to lead the people you manage in a way that allows them to be successful, because that's certainly going to allow you to advance on into whatever career opportunities you might want in the future as well.
Great opportunity. I always, when I ask this question to when I'm being a host of this podcast, I always take notes on those because they're good feedback. So, well, thank you very much, Dave. We really appreciate you taking the time to be part of us. And with this, this concludes another episode of the Feed Science Podcast presented by WiseNetics. Thank you for the audience for joining us today. Please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and stay updated on future episodes. If you have any topic that you want to see in our Feed Science podcast, please leave it there on the comment section. And if you have enjoyed today's episode, please also, like I mentioned earlier, leave us a review. Your feedback is very valuable for us. Until next time, this is Carlos Campoadal from the Feed Science podcast signing off. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.